I I put this last guy on very simply before I knew anything about him because two of my favorite teammates were the Jenkins brothers. So I had obviously Cullen was in Green Bay for years, and Cullen was always like Cullen was initially, and Cullen, if you're listening to this, I don't remember, so maybe I'm not remembering this correctly, but I think he started off as like a camp guy and earned a spot. He was out of like Western Michigan or Eastern Michigan, and then his brother Kris got drafted to Carolina, and I remember the first year I played Kris, and I was like, holy shit, like Kris is gonna be a problem. And I think I played him 3 years in a row. And the third year was on Monday Night Football. It was my last year in Green Bay, and they had Mike Rucker, Kris, Brenson Buckner, Julius Peppers, Dan Morgan, Will Witherspoon, Chris Gamble was out on one side. Mike Minter was one of the safe. I mean, they were guys. They were as stacked as you could find in the National Football League. Best box seven in the National Football League. Best D-line hands. It was like joke how good they were, and it was because of this guy's dad. And I ended up going there in large part, to be honest with you, because I had never played with a defense that good and that confident, and I just had those kind of dudes on it. And I was like, man, I'm out here like fighting wars against these guys. I would love to be able to play with these guys. And first year before the quarterback got hurt, first year we go to the NFC Championship, and this guy had a lot. His dad Kris had a lot of things to do with it. He was an All-Pro caliber player. He was a guy that had a hard time keeping his weight down, but it's one of those coulda, woulda, shoulda. If he could have kept his weight down, you're looking at a guy who's probably wearing a gold jacket. He had that kind of talent. So Kris, his son Kris, actually reminds you more of Cullen was a lot smaller, but had a lot of wiggle to him. Because Kris Jenkins is at Michigan at 6'3", 299 pounds, 300 pounds. National championship. Here's the word I'm just going to use for this guy. He is a complete value add to whatever team he comes into. I mean, I don't know. I don't understand the draft picks. I look at guys like, okay, this is a day one guy or day two. I don't understand where this guy lands, but I'm just telling you, this guy can play football. Okay, so we talked about it. Former Packer Cullen Jenkins, his uncle. Big Kris is an All-Pro. And number 94 on the screen, guys. Michigan they're purpose built. They're doing things a very specific way to run the defense they want to run. And so you have to look at how well he's doing what he's being asked to do instead of how does that help me at 3 technique, or how does that help me as a traditional 3-4 player? How does that work? Because otherwise it's not going to give you what you want. So he's purpose built for this. He does a great job at displacing multiple humans all the time. So you see it here, and this is against Fasciano and one of the premier left tackles in this draft, and the left guard, and they fold the linebacker over and they create this double. And you'll notice the entire game, these guys can't get up to the second level because he does such a good job. And quite frankly, he plays on the Penn State's side of this line of scrimmage more often than not. And so when you watch tape on guys like this, don't watch the ball because this is an RPO. Look at the line of scrimmage. Look where everybody else is. Now, again, he's against their best guy in the left tackle. And then the left guard, he's getting double teamed damn near every play. And he's the one playing on the opposite side of the line of scrimmage. Why? Because he's in a great stance. He's got an incredible first step, and he plays hat and hands as well as anybody. His leverage, his hand placement, his technique is really, really high level. Really, really high level. So again, don't watch the ball because it ends up being a little bubble screen. But he's making the play in the run part of the RPO on their side of the line of scrimmage. We look here. Now, they're trying to run a double with a fold block underneath. Okay. Look what he does to this. Ruins the whole play. Takes off that tackle, just blows that tackle up, screws up the pulling guard. They got the backside fullback leading up. He ends up taking him on, stuffs the whole thing. They don't get the first down, throws him on the ground. So you see it here one more time. Shocks that guy, pushes him back past the line of scrimmage, stiff single arm pressing him as he's taking on 44, the fullback, bop, and ruins the play. It's not sexy, guys, but for me, that's football porn, man. That is awesome to watch. This guy's an absolute stud. Again, appreciate the pad level. You see just what now I'm going to rewind this because it's important. Watch the dip and explosion and then the hand press in place. Okay. Now, again, Penn State's nothing to cough at, right? This is a big time college football. Look what he does to that guy. I mean, just absolutely manhandles him. He blows him back in the off the line of scrimmage so much that 44, again, the fullback ends up running into that block. Okay. And he ruins the play. Right. He's the one ruining these plays. Now, I put recognition on there along with pad level and technique. He steps to the tackle. Tackle steps out. His eyes immediately go to the guard. He blows up the guard. Boom. Again, consistently playing on their side of the line of scrimmage, locked out. Now, the double team gave up this play. He ends up trying to fall in and making the play at the end. But the recognition, the play speed, and the technique, when we're watching tape, you want to see, can that guy make a decision or read and react and then have really, really high level technique when he's doing it? And again, you might not appreciate just from it's not a sexy way to watch film, or it doesn't look like he's making a lot of plays, but I'm telling you, this is a problem when you're trying to design run game. He gets washed here. So they run a little spike. Fashanu does a good job of just washing, just part of the scheme, not a big deal. Now, here's the real problem in their game. They rush 3 a lot. He ends up getting doubled a lot. So he ends up getting doubled onto the tackle. You see his hands are inside his read. He maybe gets held, maybe he doesn't right there. Not a big deal. Then we see it again. Bottom line for this guy, a lot of dirty work. Technically, really, really high-level player. I think we get the double, then he's just got to, he's got to put some time in, blah, blah, blah. But when you watch this stuff, man, it's really impressive. He's a really, really good player. I think the verdict for me is Latu's not going to be around. He's a guy that you would love to draft and develop. I think over the long term, you just see some smoothness there. There could be something there that's really good. But the production, when you start going, okay, well, Colorado and what was it? Charleston College or University or whatever, not, 6 out of the 13 sacks in those 2 games. How was he against other guys? You really have to dig in, because we saw some stuff against the Arizona guys that you don't like. You don't like the pad level out of the stand up. Byron Murphy II looks like Cedric Darby lookalike to me. And I say that with a lot of respect, because I think Cedric Darby was a hell of a good pro, and he had a long, very, very successful career that probably most people don't understand. I like Jenkins the best. And I don't know where these guys are all drafted in different rounds, but if you're going to be like, who's going to add the most value to your team, it would be Jenkins for me. Because I think you have enough guys at the defensive end position that can get sacks, and we have struggled in the run game from a stopping the ball at the line of scrimmage standpoint. And I just see Jenkins consistently against a good team, not against NFL guys, granted, but just, again, what things transfer. Stance, first step, hands inside, playing on their side of the line of scrimmage, locking out. Like, he does it almost flawlessly most of the game. So I love that part of him. He uses his pad level the way it should be used. He uses his pad level better than the 6-foot guy, and he's 6'3", 300 pounds. So I really, really like that. I really, really like all 3 of those guys, but I think, Jenkins for me, it's not just because his uncle and his dad are both some of my favorite teammates and guys to play against. I used to have some. Cullen used to just be one of these guys where he was so sneaky, and he had spins, and he could spin backwards and forwards, and He had great wiggle to him. He was so crafty that he was one of those guys. He was a camp guy. So, initially. And so you're like, yeah, I should never, shouldn't have a hard time against a camp guy. And you're like, son of a bitch, this camp guy's really good. And then camp guy ended up being there for like 5 years because he was such a good player. So I like the family can play ball, man. Couple listener questions before we get chance to watch any running backs. And if so, who do you like? I don't think I've really watched running backs this year, and I probably should. Maybe I'll do that the week of the draft, just because, even with AJ coming back, I think I've said this before. For me, I actually did take a peek at a couple guys, and there's just like there wasn't anybody like the kid from Texas last year or Jahmyr Gibbs. Like maybe it just didn't click, or maybe I haven't just heard the buzz. Maybe I looked at the wrong guys, and I could look at some guys next week because of that. Because it's a position I think that is, I for me, that change up guy, that like LaDainian Tomlinson, Jahmyr, like the guy that can catch the ball in the backfield, the guy that can, the Reggie Bush, that's just a very, very unique skill set. To have a guy like that in your team that you can draw like a separate game plan around, or more importantly, the defense has to really consider every time he comes in the game, is different than just having an all-pro Josh Jacobs type back with AJ in whatever kind of status he's going to be. I think that's very important. Why isn't Sterling Sharp in the Hall of Fame? You got me, man. I think it's a lot of times it has to do with, situation, not necessarily even numbers, but length. And then, how much does Brett's greatness overshadow everybody else's success? That's some there. Armchair evaluators can watch college shape, or how do scouts and GMs project what they can become? Zach Tom had to add weight and maintain agility. As a coachability, what goes into projecting ceilings? We just talked about it, really, right? You always assume that guys can add a little strength when they're coming out of college because they're underdeveloped, because they're only 21, 22 years old. But you really there's a couple of things that I believe that I know for a fact a lot of guys on ESPN now have said the exact opposite to me. I do believe for 99% of the people out there, when you enter an NFL building at 22 years old, you've kind of developed your personality. You're not completely developed human. Like your cerebral cortex or frontal lobe doesn't develop until you're 24 and a half, I believe. But I think if you're an asshole at 19, or, at 15 through 22 years old, and you walk into a building, I think you're still going to be an asshole. I think if you don't like to, if the game's always been super easy to you, and so you treat people poorly and you don't study and you don't have a great work ethic, I don't think that struggling in the National Football League is necessarily going to mean that you're going to create this work ethic. I think that you have to really understand what kind of person you're drafting from, just how bad they want to be great, how bad they want to make it, how desperate they are to be successful. And I think you can find a lot of that out by going back to their college, and trying to find people that you trust that can that will give you an honest answer. So I think that part of it's maybe the most important part for me, because I honestly, I just know I know that a lot of people that are making decisions think that they're, quote, unmolded clay, that it's our responsibility to shape him as people who work in the building. It's like, dude, the guy is who he is. You can try to give them the tools to be successful, and you can try to help them take that path. But if they don't have the intrinsic motivation within them for whatever reason, that's very, very tough to unearth. It would be you would do better to find guys who have the intrinsic motivation and the behaviors and the character traits that you want to start with, and then try to teach the football, then find the tangibles, the height, weight, the speed that you want without any of the intangibles, and then hope that you're going to change behaviors. I think that's really tough. And then you just start looking at movement. And let me just preface that, or let me go back and say, listen, if a guy, has a checkered past, I certainly did. If a guy has, if you don't like the way the guy walks into a room, there's tolerable things. I'm talking very strictly about, is the guy here to work? Is he here to just be in the National Football League? Because those are two different things. And in my opinion, if you got a guy who's super talented, but he just wants to be in the National Football League, I don't think you're going to convince him otherwise, or at least I don't think it's worth your organization's time to try to convince him otherwise, if that makes sense. Then you're going to look at movement, and movement trumps all because let's say every position except for quarterback, even though footwork obviously for quarterback is very important. Movement trumps all because that is going to be where they default when things are like when it hits the fan. You're going to default to kind of you don't you don't rise to your expectations to fall to the level of your training, something like that. Greek philosopher. I'll remember his name in a second as soon as I get off the air. Said that, but the point is, when things are going poorly, that reveals how you move, how you react, how you think, what your default mechanism is, right? What your training has taught you. So it's our responsibility to train them in the system that we believe is the best. It is our responsibility to teach them the technique that we believe is the best. If they are coming in with a natural predilection to beat one-on-one pass rush, to win one-on-ones, wide receivers against DBs, if they have that, then what you're trying to figure out is how much of it's natural, how much of it is God-given, how much of it is work, right? And you're trying to figure that out because you want to see how much value you can add. And then with that, you project, okay, this is where he might be able to get to over the course of 4 or 5 years until that second contract. And I think a lot of stuff goes into that, obviously. The coaching staff you have, the scheme you're going to run, the quarterback you have in a lot of situations, all of that matters. And so that's why this is that's why they employ so many people in the personnel department. That's why the coaching staff gets involved, right? And then the other thing I guess that I didn't talk about that I should is every single coach is going to have players that they really, really want to coach. And they're going to have players where they'll coach because they have to, not because they want to. And so if you can align your personnel department with your coaching staff, and your coaching staff can say, hey, listen, I like these 5 players. You rank them however you want, but I really want to work with at least one of them, versus the personnel department going, I have these 5 players and you rank them however you want because I want to draft one of them. You see the difference there is like the guy who has to actually work with them every day has a larger say in who they're picking up versus the guy who wants to draft, and then if he doesn't develop, blame it on the coach, has a larger say, and that's a problem. So there's a lot of things go into it, but I can tell you this honestly: once you look at your kind of your cutoff line for the physical trait. So I always liken it to like riding the ride at Disneyland. You got to be this tall to ride the ride. Once you meet that physical requirement, the number one thing you got to look to is what kind of behaviors, what kind of character traits does this person have? Is it the kind of person that is going to raise the level of intensity, of intelligence, and whatever in our room? And if that's what we're looking for, and if the answer is yes, and like he starts moving, quite close to the top of the board. So hope that makes sense, guys. I hope that's helpful. Gosh, I hope for like one more week, and then we can just start talking about like real football again, and not. These guys are fun to watch. Don't get me wrong, but I got to stay off Twitter for another week for this, for these mock drafts and these. This guy won once. It matters. Find me on Mike Wall 68 on Twitter or X, Process to Perform on Instagram. Guys, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed. Kris Jenkins, miss you, man. Cullen, see ya.